and only at 7:05. It's not bad. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Technically, if we want, we can still say Chag Sameach. We're, at the end of Chag. It's not really sundown just yet, but we're almost there for Chag Sameach, Simchat Torah. So this is our first class officially. Last week was our sort of like extra/intro, holiday reading of Ecclesiastes. But now we sort of get into our actual coursework for the year. And if we remember last year, we actually chazak benit chazek. We actually finished the entire Bible last year, so that was really cool to get a chance to actually finish all the way in Chronicles. Which means, as we learn from Simchat Torah, what happens? Back to the beginning. So we are back to the very, very beginning, Genesis 1:1. So, fitting with our Torah cycle. Now, we're not going to do a Parsha HaShavua. We're really going to go straight through right from the beginning. So we're going to start with Genesis 1:1. We'll get where we're going to get, and then we'll pick up again next week wherever we leave off. So we're going to do the entire Torah, first book to last book, and we'll see how far we get this year. With all of that said, let's say the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah
Adonai
Eloheinu
melech haolam
asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Goodness, there's definitely too much of v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I'm getting texts, I'm getting emails all at once. Lovely. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. Sandy needs the link, which is ironic. I hope people need the link. The link. So, and we need everyone at home to mute because we're getting a lot of feedback and a lot of TV and everything else that's happening. And so I'm just going to forward her an email. Okay. Okay. Much delayed, but now we can actually begin. Genesis 1:1. And so the people who are in the room have a copy of the Tanakh, the Bible, and here we're reading from a translation from the Plout. So it won't be exactly the same, but it'll be close enough. So we can all have sort of a sense of where we are. So we're going to begin at the beginning. Rick, you want to kick us off on the inaugural voyage here of this journey?
What do you want to do? Chapter 2?
Yeah, just chapter 1:1, and we'll read through verse 5.
When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
Now, can I get a thumbs up at home if you can hear that at home? Good. I just want to make sure they can hear at home. Make sure that they're with us. Okay, so there we go. We kicked it off right to the very beginning. When God was about to create the earth, everything was chaos. Chaos. Very fitting. And so God says, "Let there be light," and there was light, and it was good. So we're going to start with the 7 days of creation. A question is asked, why does the Bible start with the creation story and not the story of Abraham? Does anyone have an idea? Because of course the Torah is about our people's story, right? It's about the Israelite people, sort of the journey. It started with Abraham through Moses, right? And the journey to the promised land. But before we get to Abraham, we sort of have three, fairly big narratives first. And the first one, of course, here is the actual just creation of the world. It's not the creation of the Jewish people, it's the creation of humanity itself. And so why do we think that is the case?
Well, it's about God, not just people.
It's about God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Starts with God. You have to put it in the spot.
Yeah, that we sort of need a greater context, right? Because if the Bible, or at least, yeah, well, we'll say the Bible, the 39 books sort of are written for a particular audience, right? You know, if it's written for the Israelite people as sort of an origin story, like this is where we came from, right? And this is our history. It doesn't only start with their history, it starts with humanity's history, right? Because that's the bigger picture. Yeah, it makes sense, right? And there are those who might say that the Bible teaches a lesson here about, again, the greater context. We are part of larger society. So it begins universal. It begins that God created everything, and Adam and Eve, at least, you know, the idea, right, of first man, first woman, that those weren't Israelites. You know, it's the people of humanity, right? So humanity is created first, and then we are part of one collective humanity, right? So this particularism, there's the Israelite nation, but it also begins in the greater context of humanity, that we are part of something greater as well. Okay? We could spend about a year and a half just on these first 5 verses, because that's how much commentary is on them. Because creation, you know, is mysterious, right? We don't have a great sense here of what creation looked like, because it's just, there's so many questions. So like, God's about to create heaven and earth, but there's waters already, right? There's chaotic waters and darkness, and God glides over waters. What waters are these? You know, like where are the waters? Haven't even created water yet, right? And so there's something that exists before existence in a way. And of course, God begins everything. And God creates with language, right? God says, let there be light. And there was light, and God said, huzzah, right? God said it is good, right? And then divided. So right in the beginning is also separation, the separation between light and darkness. And we get a little bit of just sunlight, you know, we get day, and no, there's no sun, right? Sun gets created a little later. But we have light, whatever light is. We have light, and it's day, and the darkness is night. And so we kick it off with evening and morning being created. There's a understanding that what makes this creation so special is that if I asked you to create something, if I asked you to build a house, you know, if I asked you to make me a piece of pottery, what would you need? Tools, right? And you'd also need clay. You need ingredients, right? You need materials. I couldn't just say like, make me, you know, a painting, you know, go, you know, like you'd have to go fetch stuff to actually create with. And here God creates, according to tradition, out of nothing. God creates ex nihilo, you know, God creates out of nothingness. Okay. Yes, we had a question here about language, that the online version doesn't have the gender. So in here we read, you know, and he said it was good. There was a he somewhere in there. So the issue there is one of translation and one of language. So the question is that when you're trying to write about God, do you write God with gender or not, for simplicity's sake? And so in the Reform movement, and this, you know, where I have it online is in the Reform website from the Modern Commentary of the Plowed Edition. They don't use gender here. So they just use God over and over again. And sometimes, and so they have to then massage the language to make it sentence readable, intelligible, because, you know, sometimes you have these sentences where it's like, and then God used God's hands for God's people, and it just becomes very hard. Sometimes like using a pronoun, but since God's pronoun is God, right? You know, it's it makes it a little bit easier. But sometimes then we slip into masculine language, and these books that we're reading from here were written a little bit longer ago, and so they have the masculine pronoun for God. And even, sorry, go ahead.
Is that what the translation is?
Well, translation is just God, right? And so it doesn't give, the Hebrew pronoun, for masculine. It just gives God, but it's just for readability's sake that sometimes it's easier to have the he, or frankly, get a she, there, whatever we wanted, than just keep on saying God, God, God over and over again. Sometimes it's easier to slip in a pronoun for these translations. And then again, it makes it sometimes when you're translating from the Hebrew, which is, not the easiest thing sometimes in terms of making it make sense to an English translation. Like you have to sort of like sometimes play with the language a little bit. It's just one of the different ways of playing with the language. And as you said before, all translation is commentary. And if you don't want to translate a masculine deity, you can't use the pronouns. And once you have he in there, it already gives you a certain conception of God, the masculine deity. The old man in the sky is like to talk about, kind of vision of the deity once you start with he. And even in the text, Leah, you gave me the good old G-D, which is a whole other conversation we can have, and why that's not even necessary either. But that's another superstition that we have as well when it comes to not writing out God's name, because the problem with the G-D is what? God is not God's name. God is God's occupation, so to speak. God is God, but God is not God's name. When they're talking about God's name, talking about the tetragrammaton at best, the Yud Hey Vav Hey, it's not write that out, because then if you write that out, that's seen, as that's God's most awesome, most holy, most powerful name. And so when you write God's name, Yud Hey Vav Hey, that's why in the prayer books you get only usually double Yuds instead of writing the whole thing out. But Yud Hey Vav Hey, that's the one you have to really be careful about. Because if God's going to have a name, that's going to be the closest one to it. Whereas God is an English name that we use to describe the deity. We use to describe whatever we believe is.
Could just as easily say the deity.
The deity, it's just a name, or a term that we use to describe the Godhead. Whatever again that might be. And Adonai, which is means my Lord, technically speaking, right? But Adonai is what we say, so we don't pronounce the four-letter name of God, which is not pronounceable anyway, since we don't know what it is. To pronounce, there's no vocalization for those four letters, which is where you get Yahweh from. An attempt to actually vocalize that, which is again not accurate either, most likely, because we don't know, because it was 2,000 years ago. But we give it a shot. Jehovah, is definitely not the way to go. But it's, to give it a shot to try to make sense of what this is. We're on a little bit of a tangent, but that's okay. That's part of the fun, of this. And so, in the beginning, there's God, and God does stuff. God helps create. That helps. God creates our world. According to tradition, the angels do help out a little bit. The angels are there to, help the process. You have to have a beta team. You have to have some people.
Grabbing the paint.
Yeah, they're the ones who have to go run in the back, and get whatever is needed, right? And so, God has many names, and so between Yud Hey Vav Hey, and between El Shaddai, Hamakom, Hashem, there's 70 plus different names of God according to tradition. That's not even including all the mystical ones. So there's a lot of names of God. It's a good thing. Okay. So we have the first day completed. 6 more to go. Judy, you want to pick up there on 6?
God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, and it may separate water from water. God made the expanse and separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse God. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day.
Okay, so now we have day 2. We get the waters from the waters. We're all in these waters back. So we have heavenly waters and we have earthly waters. And so that's the idea of separation. In the very beginning, again, we get a lot of talk about separation, which is going to be a theme throughout the Torah. That there is a power and benefit to being separate. That there is even the word for holiness actually derives from the word separation. So there's something special about being separate. So that's we have throughout Genesis. God is moving stuff all around. Okay, God's feng shuiing the universe in the first part of this. Sam, I'm going to pick up on 9.
God said, let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and gathering of waters he called sea. God saw that there was good. This was good. God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit, with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit, with the seed in it. God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day.
Yay! Okay, so on the third day, by the way, we don't get not only one but 2 goods, right? We get it's good in verse 10, with the separation and creating earth and seas, and then we get good a second time in verse 13 that God saw how good it was again with all of the fruit and the vegetation. Gotta have some foliage around. They gotta have some greenery. So God's creating the green as well. So we get the earth is coming into a greater focus. Okay. Melissa, you want to pick up?
God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years, and they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser light to dominate the night and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a 4th day.
A 4th day. Okay, so now what do we have? Universe, right? We have sun and moon and stars, right? That's what we have here. No, not yet. No moon.
Smaller light in the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stars.
2 great lights. One for the day, one for the night. I don't think it necessarily names them, I guess, but excellent. And so now again, we have a little evening time and morning time for real. So we have the actual lights. We have a day. Okay. And now we're gonna pick on the folks at home. Okay, Carolyn Gold, you want to unmute? No, she's there, there. You got it. Okay, let's go over here on verse 20.
God then said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly over the earth across the face of the expanse of the sky. God then formed the great sea monsters and every creature that creeps with which the waters swarm, all true to their types, and every winged bird, each true to its type. And God saw how good it was. God then blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, a 5th day.
Oh, thank you for that. So now we get all the animals, or at least the sea animals, and the birds and everything else. So we have a lot of different flying creatures and swimming creatures that are now created on day 5. The great sea monsters, scary stuff. There's some Jewish traditions about the Leviathan. It's a gigantic sort of like sea creature amongst others. And as I like to say, as somebody who has frequented many an aquarium in my time, with the kids, I always feel like the sea is where God hides the mistakes. It's like there's a whole lot of scary, creepy things under the water that are just that they shouldn't be, but they're there. And there's really weird creatures underwater. It's fascinating when you really look at them and really learn about oceanography and maritime stuff and also the animals. It's really very interesting. A lot of crazy stuff down there, and I don't think we've even figured out half of it yet. There's probably a lot more to be discovered. I'm not going to break into under the sea about both the Little Mermaid, but you get my point. There's a lot of cool stuff down there to see. I'm sure everyone is disappointed about my lack of singing that. Okay, so we're going to keep on going here, but we have all these animals and be fruitful and multiply. We have the animals procreating, so we're going to have lots of animals, to see. And this really wonderful thing about some of the diversity of all of these different creatures. Even actually, frankly, recently I went took a zoo area and I saw this bird. I'm like, that doesn't look right, but there it is. It's a very interesting, different kind of bird that I hadn't seen before. And so there's a time to really marvel at the wonders of creation. So there's lots of cool animals, and God's not done yet. We need some more animals over here on 24. Sharon, you want to pick up there?
God then said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every type, domestic animals and creeping things and wild animals, each true to its type. And so it was. Thus God made the wild animals, each true to its type, and the domestic animals, each true to its type, and every creature that creeps on the ground, each true to its type. And God saw how good it was. Continue?
Yeah, we can go.
Okay. God now said, let us make human beings in our image, after our likeness, and let them hold sway over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the beasts, over all the earth, over all that creeps upon the earth. So God created the human beings in the divine image, creating them in the image of God, creating them male and female. God then blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and tame it, hold sway over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every animal that creeps on the earth. And God said, look, I have given you all the seed-bearing plants on the face of the earth, and every tree that has in it seed-bearing fruit. These are yours to eat. And to every land animal, and to every bird of the sky, and to all that creeps on the earth, in which, is the breath of life, I give all green vegetation for food. And so it was. God then surveyed all that God had made, and look, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning on the 6th day.
Very nice. Thank you. That's quite a run. We have a lot there to talk about. So first part's easy enough, right? 24 and 25. Now we have more animals. We got cows, we got lions, and everything in between, whatever you want. We got snakes, we got all kinds of animals are being created here. And now the fun begins at 26. God says, let us, the royal we, perhaps, right? Could be a nod to the angels as well. There's a lot of stories about this us, right? Which we're going to dive into in a moment. Let us make human beings in our own image, after our likeness, and they can be the boss. Basically, that's 26. Right? They get to rule over everything. So there's a story about how there's a debate between God and the angels, or whether human beings should be created. So God's saying, hey, I think I'm going to create some human beings. Let me tell you all about them. And the angel's like, yeah, I don't know about this, because these people, some of them are going to stink. They're going to be mean. And says, well, some of them are going to be great. And some of them are going to, create war. Well, some are going to do peace. And they're all sort of like arguing and debating with each other, but the merits of humanity being created. And God sort of takes a back step from the argument. And while the angels are still fighting amongst themselves, God creates people. So like God sort of did a unilateral move as the angels couldn't really come to an agreement on the merits of humanity. It's such a nice world. It's too good for people. So it was the angels' idea. They're going to come, they're going to screw it all up. Maybe they were prescient. But that being said, the idea being that there was this debate, in the story of God and the angels having an argument on the merits of humanity being created. I see something in the chat here. Okay, and so now we get to that question of image of God. We are created in the image of God. What does that possibly mean?
High expectations, I think.
High expectations, right? If we're going to be like God in some way, or we have some sort of godliness that is within us, right? It's a nice high bar. Is it meant to be a physical image? Right? So like that's the
No.
first question, right? Does God have physical form? God ain't got nobody. Sorry. So yes, that is true, right? That we don't believe in a God of physical form, right? So God doesn't have
Right.
arms and legs and whatever it is. At least that's what I would say, certainly, and what Maimonides would say amongst others. That we got well, Bonnie, we're gonna get to Adam coming up. That's a great comment, because Bonnie had a great question on Adam. We haven't even gotten to Adam and Eve yet, because we have two creation stories. We have this one, and then backing up to it with another creation story.
Adam's roof.
Well, we're gonna get to we're gonna get to all that good stuff. But the point is, in this first story, Adam and Eve aren't there yet, right? So God just creates humanity, right? God creates people, right? In the image of God. God creates the human beings in the divine image. Now, again, there's been a lot of ink and a lot of whatever it is spilled on this idea of the conception of image of God, right? So what does that mean? So if it's not physical form, then we can say it's something maybe about our souls, are divine in some way, right? That God implants within us something special, something eternal that is in God's image. This idea of us being God's shadow, right? On earth. Or sort of a reflection in a way, again, not physically, but possessing some of the characteristics that God might have. As God is just, we're supposed to be just. As God is good, that sort of idea. And the other is maybe, again, soul-based. There's just a lot of different ideas. All that means actually be created in the image, right, of God.
How close is the translation of the word image to the Hebrew word that's actually used?
It's there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Tselem Elohim. Yeah, Tselem is image, in any real, because we get it later about not creating images of God,
Yeah,
right? So from some other context, we have a sense of that. That's actually why it's so tricky. And this was special, I want to say, that talked about the idea that we are not allowed to create, an image of God, because we are the image of God. And that's why we can't create one, because it would be redundant, because we are in fact God's image. We can't create, the image of God. It's already been done. It's already been created, so to
When you
speak.
say we can't create the image of God, you're not talking about like an idol or a.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
You are.
Yeah,
That's what you are talking about.
about that's what we're commanded, against idolatry and trying to create,
Right.
much like in Islam, as well, where they can't create
That's
images,
Disaster. I was thinking.
of the deity or even of Muhammad, right? Or else that's a
Right.
conflagration.
Right.
And the difference between Catholics and Protestants, frankly, are very similar. So you go to the Catholic, churches, and there's icons everywhere. And in a Protestant tradition, you don't have the same thing. So there is a sort of a difference about iconography and about what it means to create different images of God. What does that look like? So we had that there now. So obviously being created in the image of God is a very big concept, right? And has many different interpretations of what does that actually mean to be created in the image. I actually stay away from the emotional part as well as the physical one, because there's an anthropomorphic issue about, giving God human like physicality, but there's also an anthropopathic issue that I have sometimes some trouble with of describing emotions to God, as well. I'm not sure God gets emotional. Maybe God does, maybe God doesn't. I'm not sure in a God who is a God of emotion. I'd like to think so, frankly, some days, but I'm not sure of it yet. But I do like the idea where I sort of land is about the spark, the soul, whatever that, how we define that as the image of God. There's something in us, this little, I think you probably heard me, some of you at least, use the popcorn kernel metaphor, that I like to think that sort of God gives us the popcorn kernel, and it's up to us to like provide the inspiration and the effort and the energy to sort of boom, to blossom, to burst in a way out and spread our godliness sort of around, whatever in us that is eternal. But it's there sort of hibernating until we apply a little effort, a little heat to keep it going and to really have it burst forth. Okay. God blessed everybody. And so here's another fun one, 27. This goes to the question Bonnie asked on chat about Adam and Eve, that's why we aren't there yet. Okay, so God creates the human being in the divine image, creating them in the image of God, creating them male and female. So there are a couple ways of looking at this. Male and female, separate, but there's actually some rabbinic thought that says they were created male and female together, so they were fused by their backs. And the actual first human beings were fused, like almost like Siamese twins, that they were together with both gender. And God eventually says it's not a good idea, and God sort of splits them, separates them out. But male and female, they were created together and then apart. But that's just a different rabbinic interpretation here of what that is, male and female. And God bless, be fruitful and multiply. By the way, as a side note, just a close reading of text. We sometimes think of it as a commandment to be fruitful and multiply, right? That this is a mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, which is why when you go to Israel or you go to Brooklyn, and you see those Hasidic families of like 10 kids and like ducklings going down the road, because they feel it's a commandment to have children. A close reading here would say that God blesses us with the ability to be fruitful and multiply, but I would say that I would have trouble designating that as a commandment to be fruitful and multiply. We're not up to commandments yet. Commandments come later in the Torah, but not right now. Here we sort of get more of the blessing and said, hey, be fruitful and multiply, go out and do your thing. But again, whether it's actually a mitzvah or not, I think is an interesting question. Just a little aside. Okay. Now 29 and 30 and 31 for all the environmentalists. The idea that God gives us all this earth and waters and plants and trees and everything. And who's the boss? We are the boss, right? We are in control. And so the question becomes, what's our responsibility here, right? So there's a reading of this where it says we can do everything that we want, right? Because, God basically gives us dominion over the earth. God takes care of heavens and we take care of the earth. But there's a greater sort of, I think, question about the idea of stewardship. Like what's the responsibility that we have when it comes to having this dominion over heaven and earth, and a lot of over earth, I should say. And these different midrashim, it's about the idea, these different rabbinic stories about we get one earth and it's all we get. We don't get a second one. So God says, look, you have dominion over all of the land here and the waters and the trees, but don't screw it up, because this is what you have here. So it's not, we're in charge, hooray, we can do whatever we want. It's, we have a responsibility, to be stewards of the land, to cultivate it, to make it grow, and to have that sense of moral responsibility, to look after God's creation in a spirit of partnership, with the divine. And God looks at all that God has made, and it's not just good.
It's very good.
It's very good. It's awesome. God is just thrilled. It's nice when you have a project, right? It turns out well. You can forgive God for a little, pat on the back for himself. It's turned out nice.
Sounds like you showed a little emotion there.
Yeah, exactly. A little emotion. It's fine. The issue that we have with emotion, so just as a little tangent here. What does it mean to be eternal? If you're forever, right? So if you're a forever entity, right? If you are something that lasts eternally, can something that is eternal and something that is perfect, by definition, God has to have perfection, within, because God has no flaws in the divine. Can God change? Because if God can change, then God can have emotion. But or else God would always be in a neutral state. God would be in park, all the time, And so if God can have emotion, that means God has to have the ability to change God's self into a different reaction. So if God can laugh, that means God is changing in some way. Because then God can be crying the next minute. So God would have these shifts. And the question is, can God shift in personality, so to speak? Or can God have personality? Or is God, what?
Maybe that's what makes him perfect.
Maybe it does. Yes, I'm saying, it's a good question, of whether or not, do those ideas conflict or not? The idea of having sort of this eternal, forever sort of force, but also having the ability to do different things and act in certain ways, right? In the world, and for God to react. So for a philosopher like Maimonides, he is more of an Aristotelian. He has his learning from Greek, where God is sort of the prime mover. God sort of starts, the world into existence, and that's sort of it. There's not a God that sort of interacts in the same way. Whereas other, classical theists, people who believe in the more biblical conception of God say, yeah, God can do a lot of stuff. Read the Bible, right? God does tons of. God's always involved. God always interacts, with humanity. God, gets angry. God gets sad. God can be happy with things being good. God rarely throws a barbecue, or at least barbecues are thrown for God. But God is rarely seen as like a Boolean. Like God's never really, that chirpy, I feel like, in the Bible. But that being said, God has emotions. Bible. And so, does God have emotions? I'd like to think so.
Later.
Yeah, later.
Well, later when the 10 Commandments are broken, he's angry.
Yeah. Oh, well, we don't have to wait till then, but yeah, because God's going to get angry in a couple more chapters. God's going to be a little ticked off right quick, because we don't get far in the Bible before we start screwing things up. So definitely, right?
God knows that, right?
God knows.
God knows. Screw up.
Yeah, and that's just part of it as well. And so that could also be, by the way, an interesting question. If we are in God's image and we are fallible, it opens up a whole nother Pandora's box, right? Of what it might mean, if we are limited, right, in some way. Maybe that's not the same part of God. We have a different part of God. So fun with theology, my friends. It's important stuff. It's interesting. It's a little bit mind-bendy sometimes. Okay, so now everything is really good. And you'll notice on Friday night, we actually say this in Hebrew, once in a while. It's been a little while, I guess, done the whole thing in Hebrew. But 2:1 is part of Kiddush. Well, Linda White, you want to give that a read on chapter 2, verse 1? You're still muted. There we go.
Okay, 2:1. Completed now were heaven and earth and all their hosts. On the seventh day, God had completed the work that had been done, ceasing then on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, and ceased from all the creative work that God had chosen to do.
Yeah, thank you. That's, by the way, another example of how they have some language. I'm sure in the ones you guys have, there's a couple of he's thrown in there in that sentence, just to make it a little bit more readable than that was. So thank you for that one. So everything's done. God has completed everything. On the seventh day, what do we get? A
No
little
work.
rest, right? God ceases from creation. We get Shabbos. It's the seventh day. God ceases in the work. So yes, good.
That other translation makes it seem like fiction. Doesn't seem like it's real, like it's a translation. But, it's a little too smooth.
In what way?
Well, they make everything into complete English sentences.
Yeah.
Whereas when you read it in a book like this, it seems a little more realistic.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure I get it as much, but it's interesting in terms of perception. Because you feel like the translation's closer to the Hebrew.
Well, I guess it is. I don't know.
Yeah. No,
but I mean, it's a lot of things are more stilted.
More stilted. Yeah.
Whereas the other is smooth.
Yeah. Now I'm with you suddenly with that part.
So you wouldn't get bogged down with thinking too much.
No, I got you with that now. No, I understand that part of it, certainly. Yeah, it's sort of that how sometimes the text when it's translated. So if anyone has ever checked out the Robert Alter translation of the Bible, Alter is a scholar. He just put out actually past a year and a half maybe, he put out a 3-volume set of the entire Bible in his translation. He had put out a Torah translation a while ago. If you want to see stilted, give that one a read, because he is a hyper literalist, and so when he translates, he really tries to go word for word with the Hebrew, and I'm not sure to his benefit, but it's an attempt to give it something a little different. It's worth a look, the Alter translation. I would certainly recommend it as a look, because it does give a different feel, sort of in a way. And so we have a question about holiness, so that comes up here, and made it holy. So I always like to say at this part, of the Torah, what's a day in terms of an astronomical, I'm saying from an astronomical sort of viewpoint, right? Like what does a day measure?
Now, like
reality, science.
The Earth spinning.
The Earth spinning, right? What's a month? Yeah.
Remember for a second.
And what's a year?
Earth around the sun.
Yeah, a year is the beginning. So like day, month, and year are all scientific measurements of time. They have to do with our position on Earth, with the moon and the sun, right? It's all connected. What's a week? Absolutely nothing. The week is made up, and it's made up from this. We make up this in the very first part of the Bible. We make up the idea of a week, 7 days, right? And on the seventh day, God rests. So we, the Jewish people, invent the weekend, or else you'll all be working all the time. So we in the Torah, we invented the weekend.
It's a weird number to do. 7.
So yeah, it's just it's a
10 makes sense.
and it has survived till today. The idea of a week being something, and it's all biblical. Day, month, year are scientific measurements. A week is not. A week is biblical.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, a week is a biblical creation. And so Jews invented the weekend. Take that, anti-Semites. We have given you a weekend, and what thanks do we get? Garnished. Okay. Just saying. Okay, maybe it's just me. Renee, you want to pick up on verse 4?
Okay, this is the chronicle of heaven and earth when they were created. On the day God eternal made earth and heaven, no shrub of the field was yet on the earth, no plant of the field had yet sprung up, for God eternal had not poured rain down upon the earth, and there was not a soul to till the toil. Though a flow would emerge from the earth and water the surface of the soil. Then God eternal fashioned the man, dust from the soil, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, so that the man became a living being.
Oh, thank you for that. So wait a minute here. So now all of a sudden, after 2:1-3, right, where God created the world in 7 days and God rested. Now wait a minute. Now God's making heaven again and earth on 5 and 6. Make it feel like there's nothing there, right? There's no shrub was planted, no plant on the fields, no rain yet. There's no soul to till the soil, right? There's no people yet. We went backwards. We
Just
now.
going back and filling in detail.
Yeah, it's a problem. I don't know.
I think it's just a more detailed.
A more
version of the same
detailed
story.
version? Yeah. That's what you're gonna tell me? I don't know.
Now we're gonna focus in on this.
Different writing.
You notice right away, right, that God gets a different name. Starting in 2:4.
Eternal.
Yeah, we get God eternal because here we get Yud Hey Vav Hey introduced to the text, whereas before God was Elohim in the entire story. So we have another name for God, which might be attributable to a different source, a different writer, right? This is our whole JEPD idea, which you might have heard before, the Wellhausen theory of Torah, that there were 4 sources. The J is the Yahwist source. So whenever you see the 2 Yuds or the Yud Hey Vav Hey, that's that school of thought. The E is the Elohim. The P, are the priests who basically write Leviticus. And we have the D, the Deuteronomist, fun word to say, who writes Deuteronomy. So yeah, it was asked in the chat, 2 different authors. I'd be guessing probably closer to 20 different authors of this text, if not a little bit more. I would imagine there were a lot of people who were involved in the overall writing of the Torah, that we have at least 4 different sources. Wellhausen has held up as a theory, but it's not perfect. There are ways to play with it. But I would certainly say that according to at least an understanding that if human beings were involved at all in writing the Bible, if it isn't a divine sort of gift to God on Sinai, like it is in the traditional sense, then there's probably more than one author. I would dare say a lot of people had their hands in, and eventually you had a group of people who were going to redact, who were going to edit, all these different stories into one cohesive, somewhat cohesive whole, of what we would call canon or what we call Torah. Some stuff has to stay in, some stuff gets cut out. There's a lot of editing involved later. Hold on, I got another text here. All of my toys. Okay, so yes. So we can see it as a continuation, perhaps more details here. We're sort of filling in some blanks. Or we can say it's a second creation story, or there's probably another option or 2 as well. But now we're sitting in a different narrative of our friends Adam and Eve. So God breathes some life into the man. So man becomes living. And now we got a story about a garden, Bonnie. You want to unmute and tell me about the garden?
Okay. To the east, God Eternal planted a garden in Eden, setting the man there whom God had formed. Then, out of the soil, God Eternal grew trees, alluring to the eye and good for fruit, and in the middle of the garden, the tree of life and the tree of all knowledge. A river went forth from Eden to water the garden. From there, it divided and became 4 branches. The first was named Pishon, the one that flows around the land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is fine. I don't know what that, but Delim is there, and onyx stone. The second was named Gihon, the one that flows around the land of Cush. The third was named Tigris, the one that flows east of Assyria. And the 4th river is the Euphrates.
Yeah, no, good. You got all the hard ones there. You got a lot of names. That was a good go. That was a good go. You had a tough one there. And so we get the garden. God puts the man in the garden, and all of a sudden there's all this fruit, all this alluring, delicious fruit to eat. Maybe a lot of star fruit, Melissa, was there as well. There was a star fruit tree blooming in the garden. I would like to think some pomegranates as well. I could use a good pomegranate.
Is it really a land of?
If I had the actual altar translation here, it would tell you where all these things are. So Kush is Ethiopia.
That's what's the Nile.
Hmm?
Is the river he's talking about probably the Nile? 'Cause, I mean, the Tigris and Euphrates we know exist.
Yeah. And so the first one might be, again, I'd have to see an actual biblical, geographical sort of translation to figure out where all these different places are. Tigris and Euphrates, we're saying, are known, but the other two, I think, are not used today. And so, but we have this idyllic spot, good for a vacation, no COVID in the Garden of Eden. You can sort of vacation. You got a little Airbnb. It's not, the housing isn't great there, to be fair. But that being said, it's a beautiful place. Nice to hang out. Everything you need. It's a lovely thing. And so we're here in the garden. And 15, Leah, you want to give that a read?
Me? Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Okay. Then God Eternal considered, it is not good that man be alone. I will make him a helpmate. So God Eternal formed the wild animals and the birds of the sky out of the soil and brought the man to see what he would call each one. And whatever the man called it, that became the creature's name.
I'm gonna pause right there. I think we skipped a little bit. Sorry, I scrolled down too far. 15 over here, right? We need to get 15. You could get there with us. So God Eternal?
Yeah, so God Eternal took the man, placing him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. God Eternal then commanded the man, saying, you may eat all you like of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of all knowledge you may not eat. For the moment you eat of it, you shall be doomed to die.
Bum, bum, bum. All right, so we got a little bit of the drama right there of this wonderful plant, this wonderful tree in the middle. Don't touch it. Ugh. It's hard, I gotta tell you. As those of us who've had the joy of raising children, it's like tell them not to do something. What's the first thing they want to do? Whatever you tell them not to do. Benji, don't get the cookie. Cookie? Him push the chair so we can climb on it to get the gosh darn cookies, because that's what they do. Don't. Yeah, he actually literally did that like 2 weeks ago with a box of donuts. Because he has learned the word donut. Donut? No, Benji, you had a donut already. Donut? Argue with a 2-year-old about donuts. And then I turn around to something else and I hear something in the background. He pushed the chair, climbed onto the counter a bit, got a second glazed donut, came down off it, grabbed it, looked at me, smiled, and ran off. Little Bishop. He knows what he wants. That's the key. Okay. So one can say Adam, and you're gonna get to Eve in a second, but Adam's a little bit of a raw deal here, it's sort of like, here's this tree, don't touch it. Yeah. So temptation right in. And then Leah, as you said, there's a helpmate here. And so we're gonna take a look. God, checking all the animals doesn't really work so well as a partner. You want to continue there, Leah, on 20, the man gave names?
The man gave names to every domestic animal and to the birds of the sky and to all the wild animals. But for himself, Adam found no helpmate. Then, throwing the man into a profound slumber so that he slept, God Eternal took one of his bones and closed up the flesh in that place. Now God Eternal built up the rib taken from the man into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, this time, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, let this be called woman, for this one is taken from man. So it is that a man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they become one flesh.
Okay, and so that's where we get the creation of woman. As a note, men and women have the exact same number of ribs. Let it be known that sometimes I think there are people who think that we have one less rib than women do because we got one taken out of us, and whatever. We have the exact same number of ribs, everybody, just to be clear. So, but we have woman, mazel tov all around. In your translation, the people who are in the room, do they use helpmate? What do they use?
Fitting helper.
Helper,
I
fitting
will
helper.
make a fitting helper.
A fitting helper. Yeah, I was just curious to see what they had in that translation. And so we get woman and man together. We're about done, but I want to see here. It's 8 o'clock already. So we'll have to get into the rest of the Garden of Eden story next week, next time around. But so everyone remember what we are, 225, right? We skip right before this nudity. The two of them are naked. And so we'll have to remember that for next time. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna end this class. We're gonna take a 90-second breather. But for everyone who's interested in adult B'nai Mitzvah, they can stick around for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Else, we'll catch you on the flip next week. Once again, well, we concluded another very successful high holiday season at the synagogue. So again, Yasher Koach, mazel tov to everybody. Now we're actually back into regular year again. How nice. So
Thank you, Rabbi.
yeah, food festival coming up.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, you see. I've got a pleasure, everybody.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you. Thank
Yep.
you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.